This is the Baunfire Gaming Podcast, episode 348. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Battlefield 6's huge multiplayer showcase, BioWare lists a new Mass Effect job, Xbox is dominating on PlayStation, and much more. I'll be talking a lot about the Battlefield 6 multiplayer showcase during this episode once we get into the gaming news. That's a separate topic. What I want to get on and kind of, rant about for a little bit is influencer influence on games and how I understand why it seems like it might be a good idea and how it almost never is. What's influenced this is seeing, a few dozen gaming content creators, streamers, influencers of different varieties at this big EA sponsored Battlefield 6 event. I'm not even complaining about it. It was great. They seem to have a nice spread of people from different games. I saw Escape from Tarkov creators there, as well as old school Battlefield ones. Literally, content creators that I watched back in like the Battlefield 3 days. I had no idea they were still making content. I want to say it was like Matimio and some of those guys. I don't know if he was there, but kind of that group of folks. And it reminded me of how, being the content creator myself, and just being a gamer really is kind of the bigger factor here. Seeing over the years, especially in multiplayer games, but not only, how it's become so much more common in more recent history to see games really seem to almost bend to the will of content creators and stuff like that. And I think there's a few reasons. I think the main reason is, especially large content creators can really create and push a narrative on a game or a studio or whatever, simply by having a decent number of followers and subscribers and all of that. But what's interesting about that is that, say a content creator has 100,000 YouTube subs or subscribers. That's not really that many people when you're talking about these games that are purchased by 3, 4, 5+ million people, right? Like that's a very tiny part of that community, to be honest. But I feel like the online community, the social media community, the YouTube, Twitch, Discord community of these games, does only represent a small part of the communities, but they represent the vocal part, right? And so these devs are hearing from these people on, social media websites and stuff like that. And while they can look at the overall experience, here's an example. Say they make a gun more powerful. They can look at their analytics on the back end and see, every single person who's actually playing the game, how that change is affecting time to kill and things like that, right? How, if more people are using the gun now because it's better, if less are using it because it's worse, they can see it. That's the raw numbers. And in theory, those are the numbers that should matter the most. But what's interesting about it is that often isn't what we see, at least not in my opinion, because it seems like they almost weight the opinion of content creators and community members who are vocal, who are in their face, theoretically, on various platforms, because it's like direct responses, right? It's direct influence, and so I think that is part of why this happens. I also think the other reason these influencers often have so much influence is because, in a related matter, if they're playing the game, then their, thousands of followers or subscribers or whatever are also seeing them play the game, and it probably improves the chance that those people will also play the game. So I think the issue with that is kind of what I've already mentioned, is that so often, even though it may seem like a large part of a community, because there are hundreds, if not thousands of people all jabbering on a social media website or in YouTube comments or whatever, I think sometimes it gets lost a little bit that that's still a very small percentage of the actual player base. I think it gets forgotten often that doesn't represent the whole, right? It's similar to what's been happening recently, like with Xbox doing multi-platform games, right? You have a subset of the community that's online, and then a subset of that community that maybe doesn't like that decision. And even if they only represent like 1% of the people who like Xbox or buy Xboxes or whatever, they seem loud because they're the only ones talking. Or for the most part, well, the majority of Xbox gamers may not even know what they're doing with multi-platform because they just don't care. It may still seem like the community hates this decision, even if only a minuscule percentage of the community hates the decision. So I worry when I see this, as a the Division creator back in the day, I saw those developers bend to the will of like literally a handful of content creators way too often. I saw them almost be scared of these people, it seemed like, and that was really frustrating. Escape from Tarkov is maybe the worst example though, because the owner of the studio, Nikita something, I don't know how to say his last name, who founded Battlestate Games and is both the owner of the studio and in theory the lead creative on it. You can tell he really, really, really wants the big content creators on Tarkov to like him. You can tell that there's one in particular named Pastilli, who you can tell maybe not these days, but at one point years ago, they had what was I would call an inappropriate relationship. Not that I think they were inappropriate in the the physical way, but it seemed like he basically would do whatever he was being told by certain people that he wanted to either think he was cool or maybe he was scared that they would turn players against the game or something. I don't know. I still to this day believe it was just he wanted to feel like one of the cool kids and like the attention from these big content creators who in many ways got bigger than the game itself. That many of these people, people like Pastilli, went from being like I think like a Counter-Strike content creator to having generational wealth now off of being a Tarkov creator. But a lot of that was at least some of that was influenced by his relationship with the studio and how often the studio seemed to, at least in some capacity, bend to his will or try to make him happy. I I understand why this happens. I understand why these studios care about trying to please these people. My biggest concern, especially when it comes to competitive games like Tarkov, like Battlefield, not really like the Division, but that's a whole different conversation, is that influencers, content creators, streamers, they care about getting clickable moments. They care about getting dominating around so that they can post a clip of that and get hundreds of thousands if not millions of views and make a good chunk of money off of that. They care about the game being catered to them and their own experience, even if it's at the detriment of the 99.9% of other players in that community. I worry about that because you know the average gaming content creator, especially the real big ones, they don't want games to be balanced. They don't want games to be fair. They don't want games to be competitive. They want games to be streamable, to be clickable, to be clippable. In the Division, we saw this where the one of the big things you still see people talk about sometimes that in that community is, oh well, the PvP in the Division 1 was better. The PvP's been bad in that game on both games forever. Just throwing it out there. But it was better in the first game because you could use your skill to 1v server. And this is referencing being able to essentially, as one person in the Division, compete with and kill literally an entire server of other players. I think it was 19 other people or whatever it was. And when I see people talk about that, I feel like those people don't remember that the reason these people could do that was because there were exploits in the game and there was unbalanced things in the game that were never fixed or adjusted that allowed them to do that. They weren't more skilled than the other players. They just were able to exploit the game to be quote unquote better than everyone else. That's the kind of stuff I'm worried about. I am excited to see how well, like for Battlefield, this marketing thing has gone. We're going to talk about here in a second. I hope that these companies remember that, while they should try to please, I guess, these people for marketing purposes, they should make sure that the other 99% of players are being considered when their games are being balanced and finished. And this maybe even goes into a whole different conversation of single player games, of not just trying to make your single player story game streamable because that's good for marketing, but trying to make sure that all the people who actually are going to play the game, all the regular folks, are going to enjoy it too. Maybe that's a different video. Maybe we'll do that a different time. Okay, let's jump into the gaming news. Kind of a little surprisingly, I guess, this is going to be another Battlefield fairly heavy episode. We're going to be talking about the Battlefield 6 multiplayer showcase. I'm just, honestly, I'm going to be straight up. After last week, the story trailer they showed, and I headlined the podcast last week with this, I kind of assumed this week wouldn't be the same. I figured it would be like a second or third story. I didn't realize how big of an event it was going to be, and I definitely didn't realize how just awesome it was going to be. Basically what they did is they brought in, they did a live stream where they showed some trailers. They showed just a general gameplay trailer, which is one of the better trailers I've ever seen for any game. It was extremely, extremely good. And it was like 95% actual like in-game assets. It was really cool. Then they showed a trailer that talked about like the classes and the gadgets and stuff like that, which was great. And then they showed another one that talked about the maps and the modes, including a new one. I believe it's called Escalation. We'll get there. Then they transitioned to some Q&A and stuff like that. But then the bulk of this showcase was hours of all these content creators they had brought over to LA, just playing the game, playing the different modes, playing the different maps, showing off everything. The aircraft, helicopters, ground gameplay, vehicles, and doing all the modes and all the maps. It was extremely good. One of the things for me is that the initial trailer, it looked really, really great. It almost looked too good to be true. And then I'm watching these, I probably watched a half dozen different streamers, and that's what the game actually looks like. That's the way the game is actually playing. And it looked so good. We're going back to the Battlefield 3-4 era, and that's, but in a modern iteration, which is what I think a lot of people have always wanted. 2042, I like it, but it is a step back from kind of the old school ones. Battlefield 5, they just never really believed in it. It just didn't do well enough for them to invest in it, and it had some base issues. World War II was also kind of like, I don't think we're ready for those games again yet. Battlefield 1 is kind of a fan favorite, and I played it quite a bit, but the World War I aesthetic and era and tech is just boring to me. And then you go back to Battlefield, 3 and 4, which were kind of, I still think to this day, where most people kind of put their flag, or Bad Company too, but that's a whole different story. This gameplay was extremely good. It was interesting seeing these content creators who, you've seen these events before, and sometimes you can tell people are kind of putting on a face and kind of like acting ridiculous and stuff. I would say, and maybe it's my own bias, these people looked like they were genuinely having an insanely good time. Like, so much fun, all the chaos. You could definitely tell the people who weren't Battlefield players were a little lost. One of the issues with Battlefield for new players is you kind of have to feel the flow of Battlefield, especially Conquest, where there's 5-6 different areas to capture, and the longer you capture those areas, the more tickets you take from the other team, and tickets are also respawns, and once you run out of respawns, you lose, right? That mode can be chaotic to new players, because when you're an experienced player, you understand you're kind of trying to set like a front line, and then you're trying to advance that front line to take over more sections to bleed more tickets from the other team. But if you're new to the series, you don't realize that, sometimes people back cap you and you have to go back and clear that. And sometimes there's a push on this side or a flank over here, and, using various tech and vehicles and all that, it can affect everything. For new players, it seems chaotic. For experienced players, it feels like there's a flow, and you could definitely see that happening here. But as the time went on, you really saw people getting into that flow, and it was super awesome. My overall impression of it is that for a game that's 2+ months out from release, it's on October 10th is when this game is coming. It looks very polished, very finished. The overall thing I gathered from people who were talking about who played was that it's not perfect. There's tons of balance issues, with some of the airborne vehicles, with the shotguns, with various, just the movement as well. There's some, things that they had complaints about. But the big thing I saw multiple people talk about, Battlefield veterans and others being like, the cool thing is that the annoying things are all just balancing things. They're all things that can quote unquote easily be fixed. And that's exciting. It doesn't seem like there's core problems, that we saw with Battlefield 5 with 2042, things that it's just too late to fix them or to change them. That isn't what we were seeing from this, and that's super exciting for me. I'm extremely pumped. I would say the biggest thing I'm excited about, and honestly, this almost harkens back to Bad Company 2. The level of destruction and the utility of destruction just looks like it's going to be so top notch, and that's really exciting. I am pumped to get to experience this myself. The escalation game mode, I believe it was called, is interesting. It looks like it's kind of like Conquest, but it kind of comes in on itself to the point where the round ends with one final fight over 1 point. So I'm really curious to how that's going to play out. They also had some Q&A stuff come out today, after the event. This game will not be coming to Switch 2. That's a different conversation to have about that game, about that console's limitations that I think people are being a little silly about. I think that console is going to be limited to new third-party games extremely quickly, but that's a different conversation. What's cool about the Series X or the Xboxes and the PlayStations is they've already confirmed the performance and quality mode. So you have to play this on performance mode. This is a game that 60 FPS will greatly benefit you from just seeing movement and things like that. I guess if you want a cinematic experience, you can do the quality mode. I wouldn't suggest it. Since this game is leaving behind the last gen consoles, I'm kind of curious to how solid performance is. Everything I saw from people playing on PCs at this event, no complaints about any lag, just nothing. Like the performance side of things, I didn't see a single complaint from anyone. That is very exciting at this point. They are doing multiple rounds of beta test here in this coming August, starting like next week, I believe. And it doesn't, some of them, I don't know if any of them require a pre-order. I've already pre-ordered, just to be straight up. I know there's the whole like never pre-order movement. I'm sorry, but for games I know I'm going to play, I do it, and I don't really care if people don't like it. I'm not even going to defend it. I do it. So sorry. But the beta test, I think there's at least 2 or 3 rounds of them coming. And since the game doesn't come out till October, I wouldn't be surprised if they do more testing in September as well. So that is a good thing. Those are all good things. One thing that was nice is they came out with some statements talking about how there will be purchasable cosmetics and things like that, but they don't plan to make them break the kind of realistic aesthetic and to not fit the game and the kind of mood of the game. This is in reference to the fact that you can play as like Beavis and Butthead or whatever in Call of Duty now. People don't want that in the Battlefield series. I don't either. What I will tell people who didn't play much of Battlefield 2042 is that game they went a little silly with some cosmetics with like outfits and armor and stuff like that. But the worst things aren't even that bad, and you probably wouldn't even notice them during gameplay. It's just some kind of like very decorative, gear sets and things like that, but nothing that ever like has broken my immersion, I guess, into the game. And honestly, it doesn't seem like that many people even use the like slightly silly ones in 2042. I expect them to kind of keep with that with Battlefield 6. If anything, I think they'll just try to make some like kind of future tech kind of looking things, but nothing that goes too beyond the pale. And then they have clarified a couple things that people are really happy about. No paid early access, which is a big deal for a game where people will be, playing longer will make you better. So, no early access is a good thing. And you don't need the EA app to play it on Steam. You will need it for the Epic Games Launcher, which I found kind of funny. There's got to be so few people who are going to buy it through Epic. But if you buy Battlefield 6 on Steam, you do not need the EA app to play it. So, like if you've ever gotten like the Mass Effect trilogy, Mass Effect Legendary Edition, you can buy that on Steam. But when you start it, it's going to start up the EA app to authenticate and things like that, which is super annoying. A lot of PC gamers hate that. So that's good that they don't require that. You do still need to log in to your EA login though, and so some people, I saw some people throwing up their hands about that. That shouldn't be that big of a deal. This is a cross-platform game, so PC players can play against PlayStation and Xbox, and just part of that. That's just how it works. You have to have a central account that can be recognized by all of the platforms, and that requires logging into EA. That shouldn't be a big deal. If anyone's making a big deal out of that, they're just clickbaiting, in my opinion. So this Battlefield 6 reveal, incredible. They did an extremely good job. Looks really, really good. This is the most excited I've been for a multiplayer game since Battlefield 4, maybe. I liked 1. I was okay with 5. I've played a ton of 2042, kind of because there's nothing else that gives that experience. What's exciting for me is that even though 2042 was kind of objectively not great, Battlefield is still provided an experience you just don't get from any other game, even games who have tried to do it. And seeing them with 6 seem like to go back to the roots on the right things while still allowing the game to modernize. It's so exciting, man. So you don't have to be convinced by me. Go check out all the footage, wait till they do these beta tests, play it yourself, see what you think of it. But I am very excited. What I'm also excited about is a new Mass Effect job listing at BioWare. So they have listed a lead level designer job on July 31st of 2025. In the listing, they reference that the studio is working on future game experiences for Mass Effect, which I found really interesting. This is the second or third job listing that hasn't. It's pretty common for job listings for games to say, we're working on the next Mass Effect, for example. But none of the recent job listings for BioWare and Mass Effect have said that. They've all said this line, this future game experiences. There's lots of ways to interpret that. They're probably being intentionally vague for, various reasons, I'm sure. But it's interesting. I think that they very likely are working on the next Mass Effect. Mass Effect 5 is very likely the next project, right? But it wouldn't surprise me at all if they have, maybe they're doing some planning. Maybe they're doing some other, things with, maybe they're planning on doing another trilogy and they're already in the early stages of planning those other games. Maybe there's some spin-offs also in the works or something like that. I've said forever, I would love a real-time strategy Mass Effect game. That could be so cool, especially if it was like kind of like a Sudden Strike or Company of Heroes type game with like cover systems and kind of real strategic, kind of gritty combat and all that. You could do like a Command and Conquer or something a little more arcadey, I guess, or like Halo Wars or something like that. But I think that future game experiences line in these listings, not explicitly just being the next game, really pushes towards this idea I've been throwing out there that they're very likely, kind of like what they're doing with Battlefield 6, EA will probably kind of go all in on this and try to make it a big franchise, a big IP thing again. I suspect Mass Effect, the big push behind it isn't just a next game. I suspect it's kind of trying to revitalize the entire IP, the BioWare studio, like trying to give it a big push to see if it's still a viable thing, because we have a TV show coming, we have another game coming, we maybe have various game experiences coming. There's probably books, comics, all kinds of stuff in the works, and that's exciting. For me, at least, as a newer Mass Effect fan who wants to see more of this world, I'm excited. I can't imagine what it's like for people who have been involved in the franchise for 20 plus years. The listing also pointed out a UE5 experience or Unreal Engine experience being desired. This, continues to kind of reinforce the idea that the next Mass Effect is going to be on Unreal Engine 5. I thought maybe after the Veilguard and how, games like the Dead Space remake and stuff actually did pretty well with Frostbite, that maybe there would be some leniency there. It seems like they're still all in on the Unreal Engine, and that just seems to be further indicated by this job listing. This job listing comes, I believe it was the day after the 100 days until N7 Day 2025. If you don't know, that's the big celebration day for Mass Effect, where the N7 is a rank or designation in the the human military that your main character, Commander Shepard, is part of. And in 7 days, kind of celebrated every year for a long time as just a Mass Effect celebration. Since 2020 or so, it's been kind of BioWare's chance to tease the next game and to get people kind of hyped, even though it's, even to at this point, still years away. Um, I still suspect we'll get some kind of update or some kind of information about what's going on via a blog or something between now and then 7 day. I don't think we're gonna have to wait all the way to then to get anything. We did get a blog earlier in 2025, and it was technically good news. It was Gary McKay, the head of BioWare, saying, "Hey, we're all in on Mass Effect. That's our next thing. That's what we're working on." And then at the bottom, it was also a like, "Oh, by the way, we're laying a bunch of people off." So it was kind of a bittersweet blog, I guess. But I still think that we'll get something before N7 Day. But N7 Day is only 3 months away. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that time is ticking down. I'm expecting some kind of big blowout when it comes to info this year. Last year, they basically didn't tease anything other than some small stuff because Dragon Age the Veilguard had just released. And we know now in hindsight, the whole Mass Effect team was helping ship that game. So they basically probably didn't have time to do anything for N7 Day. I'm hoping that's going to be different this year. And then the final thing I have is that Hillary Heskett, she's a lead producer on Mass Effect, tweeted on August 1st, it's going to be a good flight when the co-pilot is named Garrus. And then in parentheses, on the way home from visiting the studio. This was followed up by a reply from Gamble, the head of the Mass Effect game, basically saying like, you do great work. Thanks for, it was nice seeing you. And then actually, I think at least one, if not more people at BioWare also responded to her to the point where it almost feels like planned, but it's probably not. They're just a tight team. Look, you don't want to look too much into this stuff. These people are smart. They've been doing this forever. They would never reveal anything useful in a silly little tweet like this. What I take from it is they probably had a bunch of remote people who were on the Mass Effect team up in Edmonton for the last week, and they're all going home for the weekend and going back to their regular routine. That's cool. That makes it make more sense that they did a job listing because they were probably in discussions of like, hey, what positions do we need to get things moving from where we're at? It sounds like I wouldn't be surprised if this this lead level designer was one of those jobs. That's why it got posted this week. And the Garrus thing, I'm one of the people who wants the game to be like a direct sequel to 3, to take place like right after 3, to kind of see what happened in the aftermath of the ending of Mass Effect 3. Them mentioning Garrus, maybe that means that's happening. I'm not going to count on it, but I will definitely huff all of the copium and hopium, going for that. So, we're a few months away from N7 Day. I bet we'll be getting more news sooner than later about the next game, and I'll be sure to cover it. We had the Circana report, which is the big like game sales tracking analyst group, and they put out that PlayStation, the top 10 selling games for PlayStation in July, or in the last 30 days or whatever, however they measure it. 6 of them were published by Xbox. So only 4 of the games on the list were not published by Xbox, and I believe I think 2 of them are being published by PlayStation. It was Death Stranding 2 and Helldivers. It had Forza Horizon 5 being the number 2 game behind Death Stranding 2. Mind you, it didn't just come out. It's been out for a little bit on PlayStation. That's also a 4-year-old arcade racing game that is selling that well on that platform. Look, I don't have a whole lot to say about it. I think the biggest thing here is that one, it seems like Xbox actually makes some pretty good games, because when it goes on sale on other platforms that don't have Game Pass, they sell extremely well. So that's a cool thing for them. It's also a commentary a little bit on how PlayStation isn't really putting out any first party games. Even Death Stranding 2, they're publishing it, but it's not their IP. Death Stranding 1 is owned by Kojima Studio, and I assume Kojima will do the same thing with 2 eventually as well. We have Ghost of Yotai coming out. I'm sure that's going to sell pretty well. I'm sure that will do okay. I don't think the first game sold insanely well, and so I'm sure it'll make this top 10 list, but we'll see if it usurps many or all of the Xbox games. Um, I think what this is more of a commentary on than anything. Like I said before, Xbox actually makes some pretty good games, and PlayStation probably needs to put some more games out of their own that aren't just third party exclusive deals. But what do I know? And then speaking of PlayStation, they put out a job listing suggesting that they may have more multi-platform launches. So this job listing was essentially a director of like multi-platform services in the United States. And if you read through the description, it basically seems like it's someone who's their job is gonna be to explore and make deals for their first party games to go to other platforms. This comes on the heels, I guess, or right before Helldivers 2, a Sony owned and published game, is coming out on Xbox in August. I believe it's late August. This is the first time that they voluntarily put one of their own published games onto Xbox. This has led to some, and I'm sure not all, PlayStation fans losing some of their minds, and having much the same reaction I remember some Xbox fans having back in the day when Xbox started putting their games on other platforms, including PlayStation. There's also much of the same reaction happening for PlayStation fans that I remember from Xbox fans of being like, oh, it's just small games. Oh, it's just multiplayer games. As one of the people who was saying those things back, 3 years ago, it's probably not just those games, but we'll have to wait and see. The big thing is that Xbox has a pretty large number of live service multiplayer games that would make sense to put on other platforms besides the single player games. PlayStation doesn't really. They have Helldivers 2 and Destiny, but that was already multi-platform because it was before they bought it. PlayStation doesn't really have a big catalog of multiplayer games. They've tried with these live service experiences and they've not done well so far. They've all failed pretty miserably, at least so far. And so I really think that PlayStation fans might need to, learn from Xbox fans a little bit and be willing to bite their cheek a little if they don't like, their games going to other platforms, because I suspect we'll start seeing some of those old single player games ending up over on Xbox. I kind of made a joke about how we may see The Last of Us released for the 15th time with an Xbox edition. I don't think it's likely. I doubt it's happening anytime soon. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it happens eventually, though. The simple fact is that there's money left on the table. One of the most frustrating things about this whole conversation about the different platforms and stuff for me has been the last time Xbox publicly talked about their sales numbers on their hardware. It was like a year or two. It was like a year and a half, 2 years after the series consoles came out, and they had said they sold 23 million of them. And they've never released official numbers since then. And what's really interesting is that when you see people talking about, that was 3 years ago. When you see people talking about Xbox and how many units they've sold, and this whole conversation comes up of, oh, well, there's not enough Xboxes for, these various studios and publishers to even bother porting their games. Well, they constantly reference this 23 million number, or sometimes they'll even up it to 25 or 30 million. Trying to dig into it a little bit, the best estimation I can see is that, at this point, they've probably sold 35 to 40 million Xboxes. That is half of what PlayStation has sold of the PS5. But I implore people to realize that 35 to 40 million customers is not something to scoff at. That is absolutely an attractive group to put your game out for and to have them potentially buy it. I know that there's all of the talk about Xbox players don't buy games because they're spoiled by Game Pass. The majority of Xbox gamers don't have Game Pass. Games still do sell well when they come over here. Final Fantasy 16 being one of the examples, despite, the rumors or sensationalism that it wasn't selling well until it was, right? So I don't think you can look at these companies and you see what Xbox is doing, being pretty open about it, and it's seemingly treating them really well financially. The PlayStation executives have to be looking at that top 10 list, with 6 games from another platform on there, being like, ah, we gotta get in on that. Like that's just money we're leaving on the table. And so they're not going to release games day one like Doom: The Dark Ages did. That's never going to happen. They're probably not even going to be willing to put games on Xbox that were released in the last 2-3 years, because they barely even do that with PC. But it wouldn't surprise me if at some point we start seeing some of the older games in PlayStation's catalog ending up on Xbox, just because there's really no reason not to. My whole argument with this, whether it's Xbox or anybody, I'm not against short-term exclusives. If you want people to buy your hardware, if you want people to do that, I think having a 6 months, 1 year, maybe even more exclusivity window is perfectly fair. It's what Xbox has done with most of these games, waiting 6 months to a year or more. Sinuous Saga, Hellblade 2, Starfield one day. I believe it was Indiana Jones and a handful of other games. Doom, I think, is the only day one game so far, but there's more coming, right? The day one does irk me. Maybe it's just because I'm an old Luddite and I'm an old school Xbox fan. I don't like the day one, but at the same time, what do I know? It seems like it's working for them. The biggest thing I'm still seeing people struggle with is that Xbox seems like they see their own hardware at this point as an option, but not a requirement, where Nintendo and PlayStation still see their hardware as requirements for the most part. So I don't think either of those strategies are bad. I would personally argue that in the long run, Xbox's is probably better, especially as we have a young generation of gamers coming up who don't want to buy your box at all, who would rather play on their phone or through streaming or whatever. So we will see. I'm very curious. Nintendo had a partner showcase. It was a ton of third-party stuff. What was really interesting about it is that almost every single title is going to be multi-platform on Xbox, PlayStation, everywhere else. And it just leads me to believe, like, why would you want any of these games on a Switch 2? I don't get it. Like, I don't understand why you would want any of these third-party games. Like Star Wars Outlaws is going to be on there. Why would you ever want to play that game on Switch 2? It's going to be the worst experience. It's going to look awful because the game kind of looks rough on consoles anyways. And then you're talking about a console that basically has last gen power, and even in docked mode. I know it has DLSS. I'm sure that's going to help a little bit, but if you know anything about DLSS, it's not magic. It can't do miracles, right? So it's not going to be perfect the way I think some people think it is. It's not going to make something out of nothing, right? So I saw people excited about the games announced, but I don't know how many people are excited for those games on Switch. But I doubt Nintendo cares, because they also announced that they've sold 6 million units of the Switch 2 in 7 weeks. I don't get it, but it's not my problem. I'm happy those people are happy. There's rumors of a PlayStation 5 release of Starfield coming in early 2026, along with new DLC. That would make complete sense to me. There's also rumors about the PlayStation 6 will be coming in 2027 or 28, and a bunch of these just made up hardware specs that, are definitely not true. So if you see those rumors, be skeptical. But that date makes sense. And it's why I believe even more that Xbox should release their next hardware in 2026, but we'll see. There's rumors that Ghost Recon could be using Unreal Engine 5 for their next first-person shooter game, instead of Anvil Next, which they've used on most of their games for a long time. That would bum me out. Ubisoft is one of the few publishers that still uses their own engines. Snowdrop and Anvil Next are the ones that they mostly use now. And it seems like they may be moving away from that. That would make sense for a first-person shooter, especially if it's going to be a competitive game, because what we saw with X Defiant is that Snowdrop, which is the engine The Division uses, as well as some other games, is really, really good for like non-competitive third-person games. It doesn't seem like it handles competitive first-person very well. It just isn't perfectly suited for that. And so them going to a more generic option for this doesn't surprise me that much. I still don't like it. EA is actually one of the other big publishers that still mostly uses their own engine, Frostbite, which is developed by DICE for Battlefield, but has since been used. It's currently being used, I believe, in all of the sports games and a bunch of their other games as well. but even they are starting to use Unreal Engine. The Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order were both Unreal Engine. It's rumored that the next Mass Effect is going to be Unreal Engine. Iron Man is supposed to be Unreal Engine. They've obviously started moving over to that as well. And then finally, in kind of non-game stuff, Avatar Fire and Ash has a trailer that's showing in theaters right now. I love those Avatar movies. I think they're fun. I don't think they're the deepest, most, creative things that have ever happened. I think they're spectacles. I think they're visual showcases. And I like their story. I think it's, Pocahontas with blue people. Awesome. Give me the most epic version of that story you can. So far they have. I'm excited for this next one. And then K-pop Demon Hunters, the the original movie on Netflix, which is made by the same people as the multiverse, Spider-Man multiverse movies, Spider-Verse movies, is getting supposedly 2 more movies, and even a live action adaptation is being discussed. That movie is super cool. I love it. The music's amazing. Animation's really, really great. It's a fun little story. Check it out if you haven't already. For content updates, kind of the same story as always. I want to get back to streaming at some point. I will keep doing this podcast, the Baunfire. The one thing I can think of, as it looks like potentially we may be starting to see an uptick in information about the next Mass Effect. My Mass Effect Hypecast is my podcast where I cover the next game. I kind of just do it when there's info. So far it's been a couple times a year. My plan for that is that as things progress, as we find out more, as information starts coming out more often, that show could become as often as weekly if it's necessary. And years from now, when it's closer to release, maybe that will be true. But yeah, so keep an eye out for that if you haven't already followed it on podcast platforms or on YouTube and stuff like that. Please be sure to. I enjoy doing all of that content, so be on the lookout for that. And that is where I'm going to wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for listening to the episode. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bond Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and or Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, hit me up on social media at Bond Diesel or at The Baunfire. Get into my Discord, which you can find in a Linktree link in the description of the episode, or leave me a comment on Spotify or YouTube. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So until next time.